So I guess in going through life, I don't know if you all had the why me question. Um, I think I did. I asked that a lot growing up in my childhood. Now it's not really something I ever think about, and I kind of know the answer. Um, but how do you answer the why me question, and how do you reason with the fact that you're living with sickle cell disease, and how do you make that okay for yourself?
I will say that I don't think in my youth I really ever asked that question. And I say that because later in life I actually read the Bible, and I read about I believe it's Lot, who had all these troubles, but he never questioned God, and in the end he was blessed,
Yeah.
50 times over. And so, I guess since I read that, I've always thought about why haven't I ever questioned, like, why me? Why, why do I have this? Instead, I've always been like, uh, I'll take it. I can bear this. I don't want to see my mother in pain. I don't want to see my father, my sister, no one in my family do I want to see them bear the pain that I have. So I always feel like, I'd rather have it than any of these people. I'd rather have it than any of you because, like I've been through it, and I mean, you've been through it too, but I just feel like I can take it, and I'd rather take it than for anybody. I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. I truly believe sickle cell has to be one of the most painful things that you can have as a human being and still, I guess, survive somehow. I believe that when we have these terrible crises, we actually go into something like shock. Because I once thought it's always the medications that are making me, out of it. But I've had crises where I've had no medication.
Yeah.
And I still went to another place, another time. Space and time is just not the same anymore. And I'm like, that just sounds a lot like, when a person's in shock or something. So it's very, very, very painful and very, very, very like almost traumatic. And so I wouldn't want anyone else to have it. So no, I don't ask why me. I'm like, okay, it is me. This is my burden to bear. I'm going to bear it, and I'm going to bear it well. And I'm going to bear it for hopefully as many people as God or the universe will allow me to bear it for. That's all.
What you're saying reflects so much of how I've approached this. I've been asked a question multiple times, and my consistent response is, why not me? Particular to being the caregiver and watching and being an active participant in my son's sickle cell journey. And I say that from really a biblical point of view, is that apparently God saw something in me that knew I could handle it. Even if I don't look in the mirror and see that, I know that I just dig a little bit deeper. There are pieces of me that I have learned about me and my own resiliency as a parent, as a person, as a human, as a woman, that would not have happened had I not had the adversity come my way. And so I am a stronger person with it than I would have been without it. I am convinced of that. And so purpose reveals itself over time. And it is out of those experiences that my purpose was birthed.
I love it.
On the same sentiments of Terry and Ray, I can't remember a time in my youth that I questioned why. And I think part of the reason is that support that Ray talked about, right? So I came from a very extremely supportive family. I'm talking about my immediate household with my parents, but then my extended family. And in Philadelphia, growing up, we had this camp called Free to Be Me. And my peers, I will always have peers that experience different complications, that I never experienced. I mean, I was in high school and my friends were getting double hip surgery. So I never asked why me, because I I never, the things that I did experience with having sickle cell disease, I was just able to endure it. And it actually, pain wise, especially acute pain wise, it prepared me for motherhood and especially for labor. I wrote a post on Facebook the other day and it went viral because it was my truth. I, in comparison to an acute pain crisis, labor and contractions was a cakewalk for me. Like, it didn't even click that I
What'd you
was.
say? Somebody had to tell you you were in labor.
My mom and my doula and my midwife had to tell me I was in labor. And they only started looking at me because I was actually getting a massage in the hospital. And they kept saying, why you keep making those faces? And I was like, I don't know. It's just a little uncomfortable. And she said, how long you been feeling like that? And I said, I don't know, like the last 20 minutes. And they like, to hear you in labor. I'm like, oh. And then the waves got closer and closer. But even the waves of pain, I was able to ride it out. And I was walking in the hallway eating Doritos. Like, it did not click that this was the pain. And I think it's because my friends who have children way before me, when they told me about labor and contractions, it was, girls, the worst pain you ever feel in your entire life. And I've even heard growing up that, for women, labor and giving birth, you're actually like crossing this portal of death. And so to hear the woman in my family express that, experience that, and then when it's my turn, I don't feel that way. I feel like my acute pain crises, my delayed hemolytic transfusion reactions, that pain, I've blacked out from those pains. I've went through days where I was in those pains in the hospital and I could not remember anything. So giving birth to my daughter, it was just that. I birthed a human and nothing happened. It was like, my husband was standing on the wall. I told him, you might as well go take a nap. I'm okay. It was that, in comparison, I did not feel anything. So for me, my why, I never asked that question, why, because I just always saw people that, they were in a worse predicament than I ever had been. Even to this day, my body at 33, I still produce fetal hemoglobin. That has been my safety shield. So my hospitalizations, my pain, complications, I still make that. And that's why, when you look up my sickle cells or you get that percentage of sickling, it's always super low. My fetal hemoglobin is super high. So when you're asking about why, I've just known my purpose and for since I was diagnosed with sickle cell disease. And it was like, if I don't have it that bad as my friends, then I'm going to do something for my friends. I'm going to do something for my peers, right? Because they're going through so much that they can't amplify their voice. I'm going to amplify it for them, right? So tell me all your issues and I'm going to tell those doctors, right? Because I'm not the one that's home. I can have a career, but you can't. So we need to change this. And so that has been my why, instead of asking why me.
I'm grateful, Terry, because I was just thinking about the book of Job, the story you were talking about right before this call. So this is almost like a confirmation. But in a sense, I definitely have drawn inspiration from scripture, a number of verses I could go to right now, but not to sound sacrilege, like just overly pious or whatever, but definitely there's a lot of comfort there. Including, I think was it Proverbs 3:6 or 3:7. It's a verse that in the King James translation, at least, actually says that, it will be like marrow to your bones. And I remember reading that and it was like a needle scratch moment, because it's almost like, did God actually have here in the Bible that he's going to give you like a bone marrow transplant? Like, I thought that was, I was like, wow. Anyway, go ahead, check that out if you guys get sent. Yeah, Proverbs 3:5, Proverbs 3.
Come on now.
3:6, 3:7.
I'm going.
But I think also to what Ray mentioned and what Tahira perfectly encapsulated with the discussion of her labor, is that with the right mindset, our adversity can become our advantage, right? And so the fact that you've endured crisis pain for so long, and I've heard stories, I think even Tosin talked about with her labor with twins was a walk in the park compared to the crisis pain, if you know Tosin Ola from
Yeah,
Sickle
yeah.
Cell Warriors. So it's I've heard that story enough from women who've had children, and as a man, obviously, I don't have that frame of reference. But I think it's important too, because a lot of times as guys, you know, we're socialized to tough it out and walk it off, and we maybe wait till the very last minute to go and get a crisis pain looked at, but we wouldn't dare act that way if we saw a woman in labor, right? And so the thing with sickle cell crisis pain is it's not limited to you as a man or a woman, right? And it's not
Mhm.
just one time a year. For the most part, most people are going to be pregnant more than once, maybe twice in a year, but sickle cell crisis pain can happen multiple times. So the level of pain that we endure is immense. But I think again, it can teach us resilience. It teaches us how to kind of roll with the various crises that life throws at us, to the point where COVID, sometimes we might be in a better position to adapt to like a pandemic, or, you know, we're used to our own personal worlds falling apart because crisis pain strikes. And so when it happens on a bigger sense, you know, potentially we're better equipped to deal with that. But in the same way that your adversity can become your advantage, I mean, I look at that Beyonce. I didn't really start learning to love Beyonce until the Lemonade album.
Right.
And what was great about that album was like she learned to squeeze all the lemons in her life so hard that she made lemonade. And it was such a dope album for all kinds of reasons, and you know, formation at the Super Bowl 50th, everything. Anyway, I'm getting real nostalgic about it. But like I think it's easy for us to run from or hide from the stigmas of our lemons or of our adversity, and sometimes miss the silver lining around that
Mhm.
cloud, or how it benefits us. But I really do believe that my sickle cell is my superpower. And when you look at the belief around how sickle cell apparently came about, which Terry could probably speak to with a PhD in genetics, as an adaptation against malaria. Malaria is still out here, you know what I mean? And we complain that, rightfully so, that sickle cell hasn't received the funding and the research that it deserves for as long as it's been made aware of. But malaria has had a lot of money thrown at it, and they still can't
Mhm.
tackle that one. And I mean, Bill Gates has given billions to malaria, and they still can't squash it. And so, if
Mhm.
my sickle cell is an adaptation to malaria, then right there, because I think the latest World Health Organization numbers on malaria, it still kills nearly 500,000 people a year.
Yep,
That's a
a year.
lot of people that malaria still gets, despite all of our medical advancements, despite all the money thrown at it. And with this one tricky little mutation, you know what I mean? Yeah, those of us with the sickle cell, with the with the recessive version of it, we do endure a lot of pain, but it confers a lot of advantage. And to use a football metaphor, sometimes it's a game of inches, you know what I mean? And so that little mutation might do a lot for our survival, especially given the parts of the world where we generally come from, and where we're a diaspora from. And that should never be overlooked. You know, and so sometimes we talk about the sickle cell story, unfortunately, almost exclusively in terms of the suffering, but there's a lot of advantage there that sometimes goes overlooked.
I also appreciate the fact that Terry, you pointed out that there's times that even without medication, it was almost like a transcendent experience. And then Phil, you talked about it being your superpower. Even as a caregiver, I can tell you that there were periods of time that I would go into autopilot, and people would even ask me, how'd you get through that? That was a really tough one. That would just take the average person out. I don't have a whole lot of memories of the specifics of some of those, because I go into this whole other state that quite honestly, it is I really believe that it's the Spirit of God that just allows me to do what I have to do in a right mind, but it does not preserve some of those other traumatic experiences that are happening in there. It doesn't mean that in the moment it's not painful, but it's like people who have multiple children. I had one, and I was like, "You went back for more?" No. So you don't remember some of the deepest pieces of it because of the strength that you have in it.
Yeah. First of all, let me again apologize to Job. I said a lot. I'm sorry, Job. I'm doing wrong in heaven. And I know maybe perhaps we should say the pain is actually biblical. Maybe that'll help. And I also think that, you know, we were talking about the support system that you know, each of us has is so different. And I think that may also have a lot to do with that why me question. Because if you go like on Facebook now and you start going to these forums and you see how many people, you know, say sickle cell sucks, I hate it, you know, ruins my life and all this. And it just blew my mind to see all of this. All these people who were really dealing with, like, you know, tragedy, when I'm just like, you know, what do you mean? You know, like, because like I said, I was the poster child for the state of Virginia. In my youth, I grew up, you know, like going to see the mayor, going to see the governor. So I was, you know, almost like a little star. And so it framed the way that I viewed having sickle cell. Despite all these painful times that I had, I got treated like so well in school. They had my poster up right next to the cafeteria. For probably even after I left elementary school, it was still there. My mother was an amazing advocate when I was a child. And, you know, my father was right there as well. So some of this may be part of, as Tahir was saying, about that actual support that we actually are getting from our family, friends, and other things. Why we may or may not be saying, well, why me? And I mean, I think it's wonderful that, you know, everyone here has had more of I guess, a positive answer to the why me question. And so therefore we need to start thinking about how can we tackle all of these people who really are like, why me, you know, and who are miserable in their lives with sickle cell right now, because I believe that it doesn't have to be that way. You know, despite whichever phenotypes you have for sickle cell, I believe there are other things. You know, you're talking about what's going on in the home, and everybody's, you know, not roses in everybody's household. You know, those things do affect it also, but, you know, it may also have a lot to do with the support. It may actually have a lot to do, like, where are you growing up in a rural area or not? You know, the hospital that you have to go to specifically, because one hospital can be completely different than the next. And so I think all these things are important.
I wonder too, though, I wonder if we aren't beneficiaries of our, I'm not sure how far we are apart in age, Terry, and but I think
About 7 years.
About 10 years, and
About
so, 7? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
gotcha. So I feel like when I was a kid coming up with sickle cell in California, it also felt like, you know, I think all of us on this call are probably beneficiaries of a great tribe, right? A great support system, and all that. But I wonder if, when I look kind of back historically, I almost look kind of fondly on like the 60s, and this is Jim Crow era. So nobody should look fondly on Jim Crow era, but I think in terms of sickle cell advocacy, it's almost like the community we had each other's backs a little bit better when it came to that. And the way the Panthers would advocate, and they were having testing in the community and doing like things like that, was something that I feel like it feels like today we're so much further away from, right? And I think, unfortunately, I recall maybe being 6 or 7 years old when Meteor Man movie came out, that was like a star-studded, like Bill Cosby, Robert Townsend, like so many stars were in that film. And the whole Sickle Cell California Foundation, we got to go to the premiere and we got to see all these people. And it was like, I don't know when Sickle Cell had that kind of support, where we were getting support from like such visible people. You know what I mean? And so I wasn't anybody's poster child, but it felt like we got much more love as a community, not just within ourselves, amongst ourselves, but I mean, from the broader Black community in a way that we don't seem to get now.
Phil, that's why I say, and I said it in our conversations when we were talking about the for us, by us, we have a tendency when we put too much dependence on external institutions and external ways, we have a tendency to then take our hands off of it and release our own responsibilities in that. And what was different between then and now is that when we held that ownership, we also held ownership for those outcomes. We've now put ownership of the outcomes on the healthcare system. We have to own the outcomes. At the end of the day, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be held accountable. I'm not saying that they shouldn't do better and be better, because they should. However, in spite of all of what we're not getting, what can we give ourselves? Exactly. And we have to get back to that conversation, because if we are to do justice to the work that the Panthers did in making sure that they brought this to the legislator, that they brought this, we owe it. We owe it to those who came before us and fought and gave blood, sweat, and tears to make sure that we could participate in that care, but we still own it.
Yeah. And we're in this moment right now, right, where it's like Black Lives Matter, and yeah, George Floyd, it struck a chord with you for a reason, and I think it's rippling out beyond just our community, but certainly if we're making that declaration, we, in a sense, have to teach people to value our lives in the same way we do, right? I mean, nobody's going to value you more than you value yourself,
are we
right?
all still here?
And to the extent that we look out at the broader American society and feel as though we are not valued, we really do need to, there is an onus of responsibility to look internally. It doesn't absolve a lot of the mistreatment we get, but we do have to look within and ask ourselves, are we demonstrating that we value ourselves and our community to the degree that we used to? And again, that's almost a perverse thing, not to celebrate anything about that era, but the idea that we knew we were all we had, we knew we couldn't take our hands off the wheel. We knew that if it was going to be anything done, it was going to happen. And to the point where, you get a guy like Richard Nixon, it gets to his level and he signs off on, additional funding and research for sickle cell, even back then. And now we're at a time where we think we don't, we question whether or not we have that political power, but it does come from that community. And so you nailed it. The for us, by us is so simple and so and perfectly encompasses what we really need to do, not just within ourselves as sickle cell. I think we are doing that great, but I think we somehow need to figure out a way to galvanize across the African American community while we're in this Black Lives Matter moment, such that this is something that we can see not just within sickle cell, but any other disparities, health disparities. It needs to ripple out.
Yes.
I truly believe that sickle cell, when it comes to health disparities, especially with all the systematic oppression and injustice that occurs within the healthcare system, dismantling that sickle cell disease can be the model, because we've experienced all of that from every facet with living with sickle cell disease, whether it's in pediatrics, whether it is as adults, whether it's navigating the health insurance world, all of that we've experienced, and even those who have sickle cell disease but are mothers, and on the flip side of maternal mortality, right? So it's like that double risk. I'm pregnant and I have a chronic illness, and so from the jump, I'm I'm high risk, right? So, but then I'm Black. So you put all these things together, it's like I'm a triple threat. How do we make sickle cell disease that model of breaking down this system, right? So we use our illness to dismantle everything, right? And when you mentioned, Phil, the health disparities, I immediately thought of how COVID has ran through our community. The things like diabetes and high blood pressure, all of those things that run rampant in our community that we still can't get a handle on. And what I've just noticed, whether it's social media and especially in Philadelphia and the Delaware Valley, people just really don't know about sickle cell disease, and it trips me out. And one of my mentors was telling me back in the 90s, they did like a pop-up of a sort right on. So we have this this corridor in Philadelphia. It's called 52nd Street. It's basically, where all of the vendors are at, like on the street. You can go there, you can get anything, you can shop till you drop. But it's in the Black community. And they said they did this pop-up video where they actually went to 52nd Street, stood out there with a camera, and did a Q&A with people who walked up and down and just asked them, do you know what sickle cell disease is? Do you know what sickle cell trait is? And the answers that they got, and they did the same thing in Kumasi, Ghana. And then comparison, right? You're talking about a country where the healthcare system is not like ours, but over there, they know their trait status. They can tell you mom, dad, auntie, uncle are AAAS. My cousin over this side is SC. They can tell you all of that. And in comparison to over here, people were saying, I think that's something that my aunt got from her boyfriend when he was in jail. And I was like tripped up by the answers. Like, so you mean to tell me that happened in the 90s, and in 2020, I'm still going this hard in basic sickle cell education in the community, and I'm getting answers like, so how do you get it? And I'm still like, what isn't translating? Like, what isn't transferring? So the awareness and the education has to be literally pumped into our community, so that way we can get the support, right, to do these FUBU type of initiatives, so that way I don't have to, as a organization founder, I don't have to turn to my government like, you should be giving me this and that. I just, and you own me, right? I would rather turn to my community like, this is what's going on, right? These are the things that we need. This is the model that we've put together. This is how we can use your support, right? Without having to go so hard and feel like I'm pulling teeth out of my own people because they just don't get it.
I want to be fair, because yes, I do think that there is a level of, functioning that is on this panel. But when you look at the hierarchy of needs, right? Why aren't our people leaning into their health? Why aren't they paying more attention? Why is it so hard to engage them? The level of poverty that exists, the level of concern for housing, for safety, the level of other concerns that have allowed health to take the back seat. That's why, even as community-based organizations, it really can't just be connecting them to care. If we're not also addressing concrete needs, they don't have the wherewithal to put their health first. When they are trying to make sure there's food on the table, they don't have the wherewithal to do that. And so, yes, we have to continue to show up to provide the education, but we also have to tear down the walls that keep them from being able to absorb and apply the very things that we are working to educate them with.
Yes, ma'am.
She went to the hierarchy of needs. Put the Abraham Maslow on them, right?
I gotta eat first.
Well, that's fair, and I think in a sense, I'm glad I let you go first, because you probably, in a certain sense, preempted or maybe rebutted a little bit the point that I was going to make about why what Tahira's comments were almost even more of an indictment, because here in the States we do have, I believe it's universal at this point, newborn screening for sickle cell, right? And so the fact that we have that here, I can speak more confidently on Nigeria, that I think maybe there are individual states that have newborn screening out of all 37 states in Nigeria, but I couldn't speak to Ghana. And so but the experience would be similar in Nigeria. You would have way more people who know what their genotype is and know what their status is and could speak to it. Now, whether or not they always do is a different thing, because there's still a lot
Right.
of stigma, at least in
Stigma, yeah.
Nigeria, about it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people who have it and don't want to tell people because we
Same in
highlighted
the
this
Caribbean.
earlier.
It's a
Dating is
curse.
hard enough, and it
Yeah.
might disqualify you from, whatever. And but if here in the United States, if we have it as a policy where there is universal newborn screening, I do think there is a breakdown, unfortunately, wherein when those results get delivered, and if a person does not have sickle cell but ends up having the trait, I actually heard this, I believe, from Kim Smith Whitley, who's I think still in your area, right? She's still out there in Philadelphia, and
Right. My homegirl.
I think this was a few years back, but she was saying that there's something that happens there wherein the communication that, hey, you have the trait and these are the implications for what that means. I think a lot of times they're simply receiving, oh, you have the trait, but you don't have to worry about it because it's not sickle cell. And so then it doesn't, they are already competing for just basic, the things at the base of the pyramid, and that's already difficult enough. But this is still a vital information, and the way that information gets delivered, unfortunately, doesn't necessarily impress the urgency that it should. And so I think as a community, we end up a lot less engaged than we should be about this issue, or that we could be, because those needs, those my hierarchy of needs, they're not all met in West Africa either. I mean, you know what I mean? So there's people here that even though they're struggling, they're not struggling to the degree that our folks are there, and they still have that awareness.
Well, let me just blow your mind talking about sickle cell trait and being able to educate people who even have trait status. In the state of Minnesota, we did not start a state. The state did not start informing families who gave birth to a child with sickle cell trait. I oftentimes say, you tell me, what year do you think it was? I'll just tell you, 2015.
Wow.
15. Right?
Oh,
so
way.
we have an entire community who may have never been told that they have sickle cell trait. Now, I'm pretty sure that my Black culture, your Black culture, if didn't nobody tell you you have it, that just means you don't. No, I have to tell people all the time, your family bigger than 12 or 13, somebody either doesn't know or isn't talking. So we also have to recognize that some of the disparities that exist, because we're going to go back to those disparities, we're going to go back to,
right,
how well we are educated within the healthcare system at opportune times that have been dismissed. And there were opportunities to address this, but that newborn screening, that is an absolute advantage, to be told from birth that you have this. You have people who are 7, 8, some people were not diagnosed until 12, 13, depending on their age, that were sent through the mill trying to figure out what was going on, or growing pains, or all these other things. And yet we can find out when our child is 2 or 3 weeks old, so that we can begin to make informed decisions from there. But the information has to be given to us so that we can do that.
Screening is not enough. They have to communicate it. If they're only letting people know in 2015, that's definitely
Crazy.
A problem.
Sickle cell existed. Somebody somewhere in Africa, had a child, and this child had a change in their DNA, and that change ended up giving them this allele for sickle cell disease. Now, malaria also just existed on its own. What happened, and what's important, is that people who became infected with malaria, if they carried this gene, they were less susceptible to death.
right.
And those people who were less susceptible to death were the ones that really had the trait. They were just carriers. They had one sickle gene and one normal gene. And so the people really who had the disease back then, of course, they were probably dying, right, at a very young age, because they didn't have the health care, thousands and thousands of years ago, right? And the people who were normal and healthy, they were dying from the malaria. So all the people that were really living were the carriers. So it's why they say that there's an advantage being a carrier. And so therefore this actual allele, that's S gene, it grew and grew and grew in frequency within the population. And that's why it's in so many people, because it was sparing the people, sparing the people who carried the gene from dying from malaria. All right, that's all.